How do you know the difference between your dream Jeep and one that's going to leave you stranded, frustrated, and potentially broke? We're diving into one of the best Wranglers ever built, the 2018 to present JL Wrangler. These Jeeps have rightfully earned their reputation, but as they get older and miles piled on them and subpar parts are used for modifications and repairs, finding a good used one can be tricky. So how do you separate the gems from the duds? Which JLs are worth every penny and which ones are being passed off as lipstick on a pig? Stick with me and I'll break it all down for you so you don't end up regretting your next major purchase. I'm Neil with SFJ 4x4 Simpson Family Jeeps, and I'm currently standing in front of a 2018 JLUR. But everything we cover today is going to be applicable to all JL Wranglers 2018 to present. Keep in mind that the Jeep JK Wrangler was produced through 2018, and to a new Jeeper, they can look very similar. So make sure that you know the difference. With so many different variations available, this can be completely overwhelming. Now, one of the things you have to figure out your comfort level, first and foremost, is where do you plan to buy? Do you plan to buy from a corporate dealership, an independent dealer, or private party? And that just means Jeeper to Jeeper selling the vehicle. It's really valuable to say that everything we'll be talking about today is applicable to buying at all of those levels. You kind of need to have your guard up a little bit while still having some faith in humanity that people want to sell good things. With the myriad of potential issues that can arise just with vehicles in general, you definitely want to be a little guarded and protect every penny that you have to make it go as far as possible, ensuring you get the Jeep you exactly want. Now, there's going to be a bunch of different trim levels and packages. Whether it's a Rubicon or it's a sport model, either one might fit your needs. Now, I'm not going to get into every little trim and engine and axle option because, quite frankly, while the JK was largely standardized as a Wrangler production, the JL has just a myriad of options. Lots of things changed over its production so far, but there's a number of things that are reasonably standard. You either get a 2-door or you get a 4-door, and realistically, the interiors are largely unchanged up till 2024. Once you've decided whether you really need a 2 or a 4-door, an auto or a manual, now you can be on the prowl to find that perfect Jeep to take you on adventures yet to be discovered. There are actually 5 different power plants available on the JL Wrangler. Both of the Jeeps that we have here today are the 3.6 V6, and they are not power assisted. There are power plant options that actually have an additional battery e-assist in the process. All that talk about e-assist, and I can't believe that I forgot to mention this in the initial take, but the 18 to present JL is the first Wrangler that we ever saw with a factory dual battery setup. And I don't mean to make that sound fancier than it really is, but this has an AUX battery assembly. And quite frankly, it has been a source of a lot of problems and contention as far as how the platform works. So when you are purchasing a new to you Jeep, you're going to want to do your best to verify that these have been addressed. And when I say these, the batteries themselves. If there's any type of lack of charge or life left in this AUX battery, it will become parasitic and drain your big battery and vice versa, and it'll just absolutely become a cyclical nightmare. A lot of the misnomers around this vehicle are simply because of these two batteries not working well with each other. There is a way to upgrade both of them to bigger capacities. You're definitely going to want to verify what has been done to your vehicle and what is important to you going forward should they become a problem. Available power plants are the 2.0 turbo, the 3.6 V6, the 3.0 diesel, the 4xe model, and the 6.4 liter 392 Hemi V8. Each power plant has its own pros and cons, its positives and its quirks. So understand, do some thorough research, whether it is the battery degrading, fuel consumption, oil cooler leaks, and valve train or lifter noise. Understand that each one has good and bad. They're all actually pretty cool power plants. There's nothing to say any one of them is like stay away per se. As far as the earlier models, they had a lot of steering quirks. The particular Jeep over here was all over the road when it was initially produced. This Jeep is aptly named RD, which is not spelled exactly like R and D, but is meant to be research and development, because we have done so much to make this particular Jeep steer as good as humanly possible. Many of these Jeeps, especially the earliest models, had a poor welds at the track bar mount and aluminum steering gears. These Jeeps were unique because for the first time in the Wrangler platform, we had electric over hydraulic steering. That means that it kind of pumped fluid and moved in a manner that we had not anticipated as a Jeep and off-road community. The earliest models were plagued with a number of issues which have kind of created a misnomer amongst the Wrangler platform ever since. Yes, the earliest ones had quirky valving and the aluminum internals were potentially weak, but they were also plagued by porous or weak track bar welds and faulty steering stabilizers right from the factory. If your Jeep has been on the road for a period of time, the likelihood is those things have been addressed at this point. But if you have an 18 or a 2019, it might be worth running the VIN at your local Chrysler Jeep dealership and ensuring that all appropriate recalls have been done at this point. Let's get this thing in the air and take a look so you have a really good understanding about what I'm talking about. As I mentioned, this Jeep is heavily modified, and it's done so to intentionally take this customer on some wild adventures. But additionally, it was done so in a manner to eliminate some of those factory variables that potentially plagued the earliest Wrangler models. As we look at this, for those at home, this top bar is a drag link assembly and a tie rod assembly. Now, tie rod can be used interchangeably, but on all of our Jeeps, tie rod connects steer knuckle to steer knuckle, and drag link connects the steering gear to the steering knuckle. Now, ultimately, the parts on your used Jeep might look a little bit different. But for those of you who are potentially looking at buying an already modified vehicle, you're going to want to ensure that these components have been addressed appropriately for the amount of lift present on the Jeep. Meaning, for anything over 2 inches of lift, you're gonna want to make sure that the track bar has been changed and that potentially the steering components have been appropriately adjusted to accommodate that lift as well. As the tires get bigger, the importance of aftermarket steering stabilizers and more beefy components when it comes to control arms and other OE parts should be upgraded. If they're not, the likelihood is those things not properly modified could present a lot of problems and a lot of out-of-pocket expense. So the track bar mount in question that has the poor welds early on in the production would be this factory unit here. This one has actually been fully modified with an aftermarket support and therefore should have remedied any issue if there was anything still lingering. Additionally, this has been fully trussed and upgraded so that we're potentially eliminating all issues in the future when it is used as an overlanding and off-roading adventure vehicle. You may want to do that yourself. If you're open to buying a stock Jeep or a modified vehicle, you're going to want to look at all of these things in a similar fashion with a critical eye and ensure that the bones are good for you to build off of, or that if you are already buying it modified, that things were done to the best of their ability. Common, early, quick modifications are going to be suspension and tire and wheel packages. People love the immediate gratification of a bigger, more aggressive looking Jeep. But that does not mean just because a kit exists that it is the right one for you or the right one for the Jeep that you're looking at. So realistically, be highly critical of this. This particular Jeep actually has a Iron Rock long arm suspension on it, which is the furthest thing from a factory suspension as possible. So maybe not the best example for you when looking at what control arms and other linkages might be applicable. Realistically, understand that most of these Jeeps have some form of modification on them unless you're buying from one of the dealerships and you're buying something bone stock. There's a lot of suspension manufacturers out there who get you the vertical lift, but they don't get you the ride quality. And ultimately, with a lack of caster and adjustability in the suspension, you could find yourself unhappy with that Jeep, and at worst case, having death wobble and drivability issues that basically give you a giant, expensive paperweight very early on in your ownership. Now, determining whether or not your Jeep has a lift on it can be a little bit tricky. And if it's a mild lift, even harder. But you're going to want to look at, generally speaking, the sway bar links on a JL are going to be much shorter. Your springs are equally shorter. If it has a budget boost, it'll typically be in this vicinity, a large puck, either metal or poly. It could also be at the bottom as well. Additionally, the shocks on the JL are going to be much shorter or comparably shorter, and typically you won't have any added brackets at the lower shock mount. Now, this is one of the quickest ways to get quick lift out of stock components. Now, specifically, this Jeep had gone through a couple different modifications and had grown in inches over the years. And the shocks were already purchased, which then made purchasing the lower shock relocation brackets make sense. But a lot of independent dealers who are just looking to make a quick flip of a Jeep because they are hot sellers will oftentimes just use relocation brackets like this one, or cheaper here, pucks here or here with stock shocks, stock springs. Sometimes they won't even address the sway bar link or the track bar and track bar pocket. Obviously, being that this is heavily modified and purpose built, you're looking for all of that reinforcement. The gussets, the aftermarket ball joints, the trussing, skidded control arm pockets, and ultimately the aftermarket drive shaft here for appropriate clearance when off-roading and that appropriate articulation out of the front drive shaft. If your factory drive shaft is still in place and the Jeep is lifted 3-4 inches, the likelihood is not if, but when it goes, you're going to be replacing your drive shaft very soon. One of the telltale signs that you potentially could look for just from outside the vehicle is going to be tire wear. I recommend that you take your hand and you go in a diagonal pattern. You're looking for excessive highs and lows in the tread itself. That is typically considered chopping. Now, you can have scrub or feathering. All of those things are applicable to tire wear on a poorly set up suspension. But specifically, if you have a inadequate suspension under your Jeep, the likelihood is that tire could be bouncing down the road because the springs aren't sufficient or the shocks are not valved heavy enough. And so you're going to look for tire wear. Additionally, if they're worn excessively on the outside or the inside, you're going to want to make note of that as well, because that could indicate poor alignment issues or a reason why someone has been playing with the fine tuning or setting. You're going to want to look for excessive wear on the outside or the inside tire as well, that can be an indication of further issues with the Jeep. Might be even the reason why someone is getting rid of it, because they've been playing with the alignment, or the axle might be just a scooch bent or something that is causing excessive tire wear. And you're going to want to be conscientious of that long before you buy the vehicle. Tires are a really good tell-all about what your future experience might be with your Jeep. And inspecting the exterior and the interior might seem pretty straightforward. The Jeep JL does not have the inherent rust issues that many TJ and JK Wranglers are having at this point. But you are going to want to be conscientious of inspecting the frame nonetheless. There's really no major weak spots on them at this point, but I recommend that you do your best to poke along, make sure there's no body filler or anything crazy. This is a great time to inquire whether there's an accident history or any type of major repairs to the structure of the vehicle itself. In that situation, you might find that there was a heavy hit on the front right. It might not actually be totaled, but you'll want to go and be conscientious and inspect that specific portion of the frame and bumper to just ensure that the repair was made appropriately. As you come back to the back, if it has aftermarket bumpers, some might be better than others. Age-wise, there's a lot of aftermarket bumpers that are within 3 to 5 years old that are absolutely rusting to pieces. So make sure that it wasn't recently repainted or coated. They might be hiding something there that you don't want to find a few months from now. As I mentioned, there's not a ton of significantly rust-prone areas on these Jeeps, but you are going to want to do your best to get under the vehicle and obviously bring a flashlight with you and do a good scan from left to right and right to left as it makes sense to you. You're looking for any specific leaks. This specific area in here will be an indicator of leaking axle seals. If it's been heavily off-roaded and not serviced, that might be an issue. Additionally, you're going to be looking to make sure that there's no pinion seal leaks, front or rear. Additionally, as you look at the skid systems, not all skid systems are easily serviceable once installed. And so if you're going to be doing any major modifications or just plan on keeping the Jeep for a particularly long time and a mechanic may need to service the engine, the transmission, do any other type of substantial mechanical work, aftermarket skids can add significant labor to the job. With that said, if you are a big off-roader or planning to do so, they could totally save your butt. So consider them wisely in the process. Fun fact, only the earliest model JL Wranglers actually have a serviceable transmission, pan, and filter. Otherwise, the later models actually have an all-in-one unit. It's a little hard to determine which one's which, and you're gonna definitely want to consult a professional. As you've watched this video, we're here to help you through whatever questions you have. So if you're currently looking at a Jeep or wanting to know more about them, go ahead and drop a comment below, and we read and respond to nearly all of them. So, let us know if you have a question about a Wrangler. As we finish out that skid and control arm question, you're going to obviously just want to keep looking for any significant rust, future serviceability issues. Now, this particular Jeep has been cared for significantly over its lifetime with undercoating of the lanolin base, so fluid film or wool wax in the process. Now, a fun piece as well is this is the front axle disconnect. It's the aftermarket skid for that unit. All of our earlier Jeeps do not have this. Some JL Wranglers actually have a delete here, interestingly enough. And most of the aftermarket front axle options also don't have this. They run what's called a one-piece axle shaft, which is basically from U-joint to inner axle shaft, one piece, whereas factory runs two. One from there to here and here to there. Additionally, we're going to inspect, make sure that there's no weeping pinion seals, and just have a look-see-loo at those bushings, make sure they're not bound, broken, hemorrhaging, or any other problems. As we head over to this Jeep, it's important to talk about some of the exterior corrosion and top issues that might be affecting you. Again, when we talk about aftermarket bumpers that do or don't hold up very well, you can see the corrosion already happening and rusting. This is really going to start to flake off and cause problems and not look nice in the near future. Most of the tailgates are pretty robust. The big difference or deviation from the earlier models, they can actually hold up to a 35 or 37 even with very little modification. Now, with that said, there are some pretty cool aftermarket upgrades that if you really wanted to have the most robust spare tire carrier possible, they're out there. The tops are pretty straightforward, well constructed, quiet, and typically have less leak issues than the JK Wrangler. However, the Freedom panel assembly, depending on what has happened to the Jeep in the past, can start to kind of hemorrhage and not line up as well in this situation. And the seals may or may not keep the water from intruding inside. These are not completely leak free, but they're not nearly as leak prone as their predecessor, the JK Wrangler. Lastly, while neither of these Jeeps are soft top equipped, understand that soft tops are wear items and they are fairly expensive to replace. Additionally, there's been a number of different mechanisms that were part of making them work. So depending on which model soft top you have, whether it be a factory one or aftermarket or a power top of sorts, getting parts for it and or servicing it might be very challenging. And if you plan on using it in an off-road capacity, it could be subject to wear and damage slightly more than a hardtop might be. I actually love looking at tops as an indicator of overall care and maintenance. If there's tons of pinstripes, which means there's lots of scratches or abrasions to the hard top, or the soft top is mishmashed and whether it has zippers or slides are not working effectively, or it's kind of bent or askew in the process because the metal bows are all mangled up, that is probably a pretty good indication of how that prior owner used and cared for the Jeep. So I understand they're replaceable, but read it as if it is indicating the general wear and maintenance that happened on the Jeep prior to you owning it. The biggest corrosion problem with these Jeeps is actually an issue of porosity with the aluminum itself. It's very common to see this bubbling taking place because the aluminum on the inside, under the paint itself, is actually deteriorating, becoming porous, pushing out and lifting up the paint. Many of these issues were covered from the dealership if you were made aware that your vehicle had a recall, or if the previous owners responded to the TSB or technical service bulletins to have these paint correction situations taken care of. And Chrysler, as a company, recognized that there was a problem, but not all Jeeps were addressed under those technical service bulletins. This was never actually a formal recall. You, as the owner or the previous owner, had to respond, complain about it, and then they would address it for you. The interiors for the JL Wranglers all look pretty similar. There's 3 or 4 different entertainment units that you can get in the Jeep, from the most basic version to the most elaborate. The cool thing about these Jeeps is there's a ton of aftermarket upgrades, like this one that has the built-in mag charger and tablet holder. These modifications don't really mean anything to the dealerships, but you as an independent buyer might really dig them, and if they're quality, make a lot of sense to you and your future ownership. Leather seats and steering wheel wear, so at the seat bottom and on the steering wheel, might be an indicator of harsh use or kind of extremely high mileage. These are pretty robust components compared to other platforms that we've seen, but you know, we're going to want to make sure that your steering wheel isn't all ripped up, because that's a very expensive part to replace. Seat covers and seats aren't cheap, but they are slightly easier or more affordable to get your hands on. Additionally, try avoid buying saturated in silicone sprays and other types of shine 'em up stuff, because quite frankly, that could mean that a detailer or a dealership is trying to pass something off and mask wear that is normally present under normal circumstances. So you're ready to take your first test drive. There's a few things that you explicitly have to look for. You want to do a death wobble test. I know, it sounds scary, but you kind of have to do it, because even stock Jeeps of this generation got death wobble. And it's kind of a black eye for, Stellantis in general, but you need to ensure that you're not inheriting somebody else's problem. Make sure you drive on several different types of terrains: rough, regular around town roads, highway driving, and some fair stop and go traffic is going to really give you a feel for the vehicle. Make sure that you hit some good cracks in the roads, and maybe instead of dodging the pothole, you actually sink it into one or two and see how the Jeep reacts. Speaking of steering and feeling, you're going to want to make sure that what you feel in the steering wheel is comfortable for you. Now, I use the phrase constantly, you don't know what you don't know until you know it, and that one's quoted by Doc Brown, the mad scientist. But realistically, you want to make sure that first and foremost, the steering feels tight and responsive the way that you like it to be. If you're unhappy with it right out of the gate, the likelihood is it's very cost inhibitive to correct, and potentially you're gonna never really like it, especially if you plan on modifying it, adding bigger tires, longer linkages, and overall a bigger lift. Braking is super important. If the Jeep is already modified and there's a lot of heavy components installed on it, the braking might be insufficient to your comfort level. Additionally, if you come from a different world where the vehicle is just simply lighter and you're not used to how slow the Jeep brakes overall, that might not be confidence inspiring for you behind the wheel. So check the brakes, check the traction control ABS system to ensure that they're functioning appropriately, and make sure that it is to your liking. One of the things that I always recommend people do is to check your four-wheel drive systems when you're doing your test drive. Now, for all of our Wranglers, we have this physical mechanical linkage. Now, there's actually cable actuated in the case of the JL, but it is still physically actuating the transfer case, moving shift linkage over drawing mechanical components. There's no knobs or buttons to push. So shift into 4 high, stop, put it into neutral, shift into 4 low. Ensure that you have complete functionality out of your four-wheel drive system. It's amazing how many people buy their Jeeps and 4x4s and never actually shift the vehicle, ensuring that it works in all of those gear reduction situations. Lastly, make sure that you have an opportunity to cold start the Jeep. Now, the funny thing about both the 2.0 turbo and the 3.6 V6 is that they both have potentially some oiling issues, and they can sound a little rattly and clattery, almost like an old school diesel. This specifically is very audible and noticeable when the vehicle is cold. So if possible, have somebody else start it while your head is under the hood, or at least at the front of the Jeep, listening to hear if there's any extra clanking-esque rattle noises coming out of the top end of the engine. Once the vehicle warms up and has sufficient oil pressure, the likelihood is that will dissipate. Now, sometimes on rare occasion, it'll actually get worse as the oil thins and gets hotter. So just have a keen ear to both of those scenarios. Ownership history and final inspection are among the last steps that can paint a picture of whether or not this is going to be a good buy for you. This is going to take into consideration maintenance records, any known history of the vehicle, And if you are able to get it to a reputable shop or mechanic who can help you look at the vehicle as well, so a third-party inspection, if you will. It's actually something that we specifically offer. So if you are in our market radius, you're welcome to contact us. Again, drop a comment below, or you can hit us up on our website, schedule one of these appointments, and if the dealership or the private party isn't so keen on you taking a vehicle in for a third-party inspection, then maybe that's a pretty good red flag to walk away and save your coin for a better vehicle. With that said, a lot of your remote buying experiences, so if you're going to be buying it from a dealership online or one of your standard online retail vehicle experiences, you might not get a comprehensive maintenance or vehicle history, so this could be a little more challenging. Now, yes, there is a Carfax report available on most modern vehicles, but, and here's the thing, I know I'm biased, but Carfax are only as good as the reporting agencies and prior ownership individuals. So Carfax are not always completely comprehensive, and sometimes they can omit or add things that benefit the selling agency. So understand that that's a good guideline, but maybe not the end all be all. So whatever you can do to try and paint a more full picture about how this Jeep was used, where was it used, and how did the prior ownership treat it is only going to benefit you in the long run. I hope that you found this beneficial in some way, shape, or form. I hope that it's given you a little something to noodle on and to consider that maybe you should look at this a little bit further. Maybe you should schedule a third-party inspection. There's a lot of tips and tricks, both good and bad, when selling a vehicle, and we want to make sure that you are a well-informed consumer. With that said, we've got a number of how-to-buy videos that are on our YouTube channel. So head over to the main page and check out how to buy a TJ or CJ or a JK Wrangler, and maybe there's some similarities that you can compare and contrast. Additionally, let us know how we're doing. We'd love for you to like and subscribe. Leave a comment below. We're going to read and respond to almost all of them. I darn near guarantee that. Make sure that you definitely stay tuned to our page so you can get more awesome Jeep and off-road content in the very near future. Until then, Jeep on. I'm standing in front of me. You could, I don't. Well, that engine's half disassembled. I forgot about that. Unlike their earlier counterparts, did you see that? I was like a ballerina pirouetting. You were unamused by that.